Park rangers often find themselves in the strangest situations, things they would never suspect. In this episode, we're going to hear 4 stories from park rangers, talking about things that they say never should have happened. The first story comes from a park ranger in Yosemite National Park in August of 2012. I was a park ranger for a short time in Yosemite National Park, and anyone who knows that park has been told there are no wolves there. This was great for me when I started working there after college in summer of 2012. It was my first real job and the job I always wanted. I felt safe with the friendlier wildlife, and even the animals that posed a threat were rather afraid of people. I had never really had to worry about beasts that could harm me. One evening, I was finishing up my shift in one of the backcountry cabins, just getting it ready for whoever was staying there next, chasing out any vermin. It was a small cabin with a bed, a table, and a stove. I had decided to stop and eat my dinner there before heading back and clocking out when I heard something outside the door. The sound was muffled by the walls of the cabin, so it wasn't very loud, but it got my attention. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out onto the porch where I could see better. It was becoming darker outside earlier since it was later in August, but the sky was still orange and purple. I saw nothing at first, but then noticed movement behind some trees where I heard the noise. It looked like the sun didn't reach back that far. And then I noticed 2 eyes glowing red in the dark, reflecting off my light as they moved around surveying me and my cabin. Then there was another set, and another. I had never seen an animal with red eyes like that. Suddenly I had a ton of eyes looking through the trees and the bushes at me. After watching these eyes for several minutes, they all began to move back further into the woods and away from me. I wasn't sure what I was seeing, and I didn't know if I should investigate. I decided to head back inside and grab my taser just in case. I didn't have a rifle with me, and it was getting late, so no need to not be 100% safe. At least I knew they were expecting me back at the office, so someone would come if I got hurt. I grabbed my taser, went back outside, sitting down on the front porch steps to watch these creatures return. And then all of a sudden, a huge wolf appeared in front of the cabin and sat down in front of me, unafraid. I couldn't move. There weren't supposed to be wolves in Yosemite. Slowly but surely, more and more showed up behind this giant one. They were monstrous creatures, otherworldly, but still wolves. I slowly stood up and began to back away, but the alpha wolf growled. I jumped and ran inside as the wolves all lunged at the cabin, barking and growling and howling. I got on the radio to scream for help, but my coworker just kept saying there are no wolves in Yosemite. I stayed in the house, hidden, crying until there was silence. The creatures had gone away on their own after what felt like hours. The next sound I heard as I sat in the fetal position on the floor was a car pulling up and my coworker calling out for me. He came to the door and he let himself in. He found me on the floor, still in shock. No one believed me, and they convinced me that the job was just not for me. But I know what I saw. Our second park ranger report comes from October of 2016. I was working the night shift at Craters of the Moon National Monument and Preserve in Idaho. My post was the Lava Flow Campgrounds, which was usually quite popular. This was a quiet weekend in October of 2016, though, and I didn't have too many campers to keep up with. It was around 11 o'clock at night, and I had just finished making my rounds to all of the campgrounds and picnic areas. I was headed back to headquarters when I noticed headlights in one of the back parking areas. It looked like someone had left their lights on accidentally, or they were camping illegally, so I decided to check it out. When I got there, there was no car, but there were fresh tire tracks that led from the road down into a small gully and then back to the road. In a hurry, it looked like. I was so confused that the light was gone and now there was no car. There had to have been. There were also footprints that went from the road down into the gully, back up and around me. The tracks were large, and they appeared to be bare feet with 5 toes, and they were freshly placed over the tire tracks. They were also unusually large. After looking around for a few minutes, I determined that there was no one in the gully and no cars in the immediate area. I got in my truck and started patrolling the area looking for this mystery car with its lights still on, but I couldn't find anything. I looked everywhere, but I decided it wasn't worth disturbing the campers, and I ended up going back to the area where I saw the tracks. Perhaps that would be the only place I could find the answers. The tracks were now covered with fresher tracks, as if someone or something was just walking in a circle from the gully to the parking lot, like on patrol, but none of my coworkers had feet like that. It was very strange. And that's when I saw it. It was a large bipedal creature with strange feet that looked like they were webbed. He was standing down in the gully, and I began to piece together that he must have scared someone off. He looked up at me, and I looked at him, as if we had some sort of an understanding. And then he turned his large, hairy body and big feet and walked off into the woods. The next morning I checked with all of my rangers, and no one had seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. No one had left their lights on or parked in an unauthorized area. No one had seen any Bigfoot walking around either. I reported it to my supervisor, but he didn't seem too interested in investigating it further, and he thought it was hysterical that I thought Bigfoot scared off some kids. He just said some kids probably snuck in there and partied all night, then left without turning off their headlights, or that whoever I saw was part of their group. I knew what I saw, but I also knew that if I continued talking about it further, my supervisor would probably fire me for sounding insane. I did notice that after that night I never saw that thing again, but I also never dealt with any illegal campers or teenagers on my shift either. Our third story comes from July of 2010. I was working as a park ranger in the summer of 2010 at Pine Island State Forest in northern Minnesota. Pine Island is the largest state forest in Minnesota, and that made me super excited about my job. My friends had always said it would be a scary job for a girl, but I had wanted to be a park ranger ever since Girl Scouts. I even loved working the night shift. One night I was working alone and had just finished my patrol around 10 o'clock at night. It was a hot night in July, so I decided to sit outside by the picnic area near the campground entrance and enjoy a cup of coffee. I had a long night ahead of me. While sitting there, I heard what sounded like people laughing in the distance. I looked up from my mug to see if anyone was out there and saw nothing but the silhouettes of trees against the moonlit sky. And then as quickly as it started, it stopped. Thinking little of it, I went back to finishing my coffee. I stood up to head into the office when I saw a large group of people walking towards the park entrance. I was puzzled because it was well known that the park was closed to everyone who wasn't already camping. I stayed there as they got closer. I was starting to get a little nervous, but felt like it was just some college guys doing some frat boy thing. I asked them to stop and tell me where they were headed, but instead they just continued. I yelled for them to stop and that I was a park ranger. I drew my taser and told them they were trespassing and they needed to leave, or I would have to use force. They continued walking, now smiling and laughing as they did. Unbeknownst to me, they were surrounding me while I was distracted by their initial approach. As one of them got close enough, he reached out and grabbed my arm with his hand. Instantly, I felt all of the energy being sucked out of me. My mind had been playing games with me, but suddenly I was following the group towards a clearing. And in the clearing, they stopped and began circling me, praying something out loud as they did. I was still not sure how I had gotten there. I was just standing there, almost in a trance. And then one of them came forward with a cup and handed it to me. And I went to drink it when I suddenly realized, this is not good. I'm in danger. I had no idea how I'd let them get me that far from the office, but I panicked and I threw the cup in the man's face. Whatever was in it was bright red. I shrieked and I ran back up the hill towards the office, breaking the circle. They laughed as I ran, but I had to get to the office and call someone. When When I called my backup and explained what happened, I was instantly laughed at and then reprimanded for letting people on the campsite. I sat outside with a baseball bat waiting for my partner to show up and saw no one coming back up the walkway towards me. Thank goodness. Surely they would be caught, and we would have to call the police. When my partner showed up and we ran down to where they had circled me, there was no one there. Not a soul in any direction. And it looked like no one had been there at all. I tried to explain that there was no way that they could have slipped by me, no other way out but right past me. After that night, I never saw that group again, but there were stories about missing teenagers from a neighboring town and a cult that made me wonder. Our last story is a female park ranger in October of 1998. I was working as a park ranger in the Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. I was on night patrol in an October evening in 1998, and I had just pulled up to one of the back roads that led into the park. One of the campers called in and reported hearing a scream, but I was used to that. Campers got spooked all the time, and by anything. I was about to turn onto another road when I saw something strange out of my rearview mirror. Across this large field where people often walk their dogs and ride horses or just go for a stroll, I noticed some strange movement. At this time of night, it was usually empty, even though it's home to many deer, rabbits, and other wildlife. But this thing seemed like a human, being as how tall it was in the brush. I stopped the car to investigate. Normally, I don't like to do that without a partner, but I decided I had to be sure that the surrounding campers were safe. Whoever was out there began moving very quickly from tree to tree, as if it were chasing something or being chased itself. The movement was so fast that at first I thought it might be a dog chasing another dog, or even two people running really fast through the trees. But then I realized that no human could move that quickly from tree to tree without falling over or losing balance. And it dawned on me that it had started moving like that when I stopped my car, whenever it had become aware of me. And then it stopped moving and stood still between two trees. It was a pale, glowing figure with a face. I could only make out that it looked male, and it wasn't smiling. It stood there staring towards my car without moving for what felt like forever, but then as a smile did appear on its face, it disappeared. That made me terrified. As terrified as I was, I thought I should turn my car around and investigate further. I made a U-turn and drove slowly along the road towards the field. There was nothing out of the ordinary in the brush or the trees now that I came close. I looked where I had seen the pale figure standing in the trees, but there was nothing. When I got there, it was gone. I gave up in order to protect myself, and I drove off towards the station. I reported that there was nothing going on, and the rest of my shift was uneventful. Until that morning before dawn. Towards the end of that shift, I decided to drive down through some very thick woods to enter that field in a different way, just to see if I could catch someone out there. That's when something on the side of the road caught my eye. When I got out to look out over what it could be, it turned out to be a small pile of clothes, and next to it was an old rusty knife with dried blood. I reported what I saw to the other park rangers, but no one believed me about what had happened in the field prior, or about finding the clothes and the knife even. A few days later, true to what was reported by the camper, we found out that a woman had gotten lost in that area of the park, and when she finally found the ranger station, she had this wild story about being chased by a crazed, pale man with a knife. She said that before he could actually attack her, he disappeared. We would find out that years before, a man had hidden in the park to escape murder, and he was never found. There was no way in all the years that had passed that he could still be alive. Could there?